The first time I pulled someone out of a dead subway car at 2 a.m. and felt nothing but focused, I thought that was strength. I was 23. I didn't know yet that numbness and strength are not the same thing, and that the man who would teach me the difference would be waiting at street level with a trauma bag and eyes that saw entirely too much. My name is Cassian Mure. I'm 24 years old. I work subway emergency response for the MTA, the unit that goes into the tunnels when trains stop moving for reasons that dispatchers describe in code because the plain language would be too heavy for a radio. I've been doing this job for 18 months, and I am good at it in the specific way you get good at things that require you to stop feeling first and think later. I can navigate the B/D Express tunnel in total darkness by memory. I know the sound a third rail makes before it discharges. I know how long a person can survive in a confined space with limited oxygen before the math stops being theoretical. What I didn't know was what to do when someone looked at me like I was worth keeping. It started on a Thursday in October, one of those New York October days that the city pulls out like it's apologizing for August. All clean light and cold air, and the sky above Manhattan that particular shade of blue that makes you forgive everything. The kind of day that makes no sense after a night in the tunnels, where October might as well be February. I'd been underground since 11 the previous night. A signal failure on the AC line near J Street had cascaded into a partial power outage that trapped 2 trains between stations, one in the tunnel, one in the station, with doors that wouldn't cycle. Standard protocol: my unit goes in, we assess structural and electrical status, we assist the MTA ops team with passenger egress, we stay until the last person is out. The last person came out at 6:40 a.m. By the time I surfaced at J Street Metrotech, the city had started its Thursday. People with coffee, people with dogs. The particular morning light of downtown Brooklyn coming gold over the Atlantic Terminal buildings, the kind of light that bounces off windows and concrete in a way that makes everything look briefly significant. I was standing on the sidewalk outside the station entrance, still in my gear, holding my helmet, doing the thing I do after long tunnel shifts. Just breathing outdoor air, letting my eyes adjust to a sky that has no ceiling, when I heard, "You okay?" I turned. He was leaning against the ambulance that had been on standby for the egress. FDNYEMS, a paramedic, still in his jacket, a trauma bag at his feet. He was maybe 23. Dark eyes with the specific alertness of someone who had also been awake all night and had decided that was not going to be visible in his face. Brown skin, a jaw that needed a shave, his hair pushed back from his forehead in the careless way of someone who'd been wearing a hat for 8 hours. He was looking at me with the direct, unperforming attention of a person who asked questions and actually wanted the answers. "Fine," I said. It was my automatic response to that question from any person in any context. He looked at me for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you stand outside the entrance and breathe like you're reminding yourself air exists." He pushed off the ambulance and picked up his bag. "I've seen hotshots do it after wildland ops. I've seen tunnel workers do it after confined space jobs. You're all doing the same thing." I looked at him. "How long were you on standby?" "Since midnight." He said it without complaint, just as information. Nobody came out seriously hurt, which is the good version of this story. "Yeah," I said, "the good version." He held out his hand. "Phenokaphor." Cassian Mure. He had a firm handshake, quick, the way medical people shake hands, confident and clean, no performance. He looked at me once more with that direct attention and said, "Go home and sleep. You've got the 1,000-yard thing happening in your left eye." The 1,000-yard thing? The stare, left eye specifically for people who have been reading low-light environments. Your right eye is fine. Your left eye is still looking for hazards that aren't there. He picked up his bag. It goes away after about 6 hours of sleep, usually. I watched him walk back to the ambulance. He didn't look back. I went home and slept for 7 hours and thought about a paramedic who could read my eyes. Don't move, because what happened 3 weeks later is the thing I still don't know how to explain. The MTA and FDNYEMS share a joint training facility in Maspeth, Queens, a blocky industrial building next to a rail yard where they run confined space rescue simulations twice a year. The October session was a 2-day joint exercise. My unit practicing casualty extraction with the EMS teams that would receive our patients at street level. The point was coordination. Communication between what happens underground and what happens when you hand someone off. I did not know Fen Okafor would be there. He was running the triage station at the surface end of the simulation, the point where my unit handed off the extracted casualties to the paramedic teams for stabilization. I saw him from 20 feet away, already working, running a practice assessment on one of the simulation mannequins with the fast, methodical efficiency I'd clocked on J Street. He looked up once and saw me, and his expression did something small and specific that I cataloged immediately and couldn't stop thinking about. A slight adjustment, like something had just become more interesting. "Subway rescue," he said when I reached the triage station. "Paramedic," I said. "You slept," he said, looking at my eyes. "You can tell?" Both eyes tracking the same now. He went back to the mannequin. "How long does it take you to go from underground to here, time-wise, in a real event?" "Depends on the egress path. J Street, if we're using the maintenance shaft, 8 to 12 minutes from extraction point to street level." He nodded, writing. "So I've got a 12-minute window minimum before my first patient?" He looked up. "What's the most common presentation you hand off?" "Smoke inhalation, minor trauma, anxiety-related syncope, occasionally blast overpressure if there's been an electrical event." I paused. "The ones that are hardest to hand off are the ones who are technically fine but haven't processed yet. They're ambulatory, their vitals are stable, but they're not." I stopped. "Present," he said. "Yes." He looked at me. "How do you handle them?" "In the tunnel before you get to me." "I talk to them," I said, "continuously, about anything. The extraction route, what sounds they're going to hear, what street they're going to come out on. You keep them tethered to what's next." Fen was quiet for a moment. He was looking at me with the same attention from J Street. That look of someone actually processing what you've said, not just waiting for their turn to speak. "What do you talk about when you run out of logistics?" he said. "I haven't run out yet," I said. He smiled then, one of those smiles that starts small and becomes real faster than you expect, like something he couldn't quite moderate. "Good answer," he said. "We worked the simulation for 2 days. By the end of it, I knew his radio call signs, his triage protocol sequence, the specific way he moved when a situation was escalating versus when it was stable. A barely perceptible slowing, a stillness that counterintuitively meant he was about to move very fast. He knew my egress timing, my extraction hand signals, the way I called a patient status over the radio. On the second day, during the lunch break, we sat on the loading dock behind the facility in the October sun. Actual sun, the unobstructed Queen's sky, and ate sandwiches from the catering truck and didn't talk about the simulation at all. We talked about New York, about what it was like to grow up here versus to come to it. He'd grown up in the Bronx, I'd come from upstate at 19 for the job. About the specific loneliness of shift work, the way you're awake when the city is asleep and asleep when the city is alive, and how this produces over time a feeling of being slightly out of phase with everything. "I went to a birthday party last year," Fen said, "and I had been on nights for 3 weeks, and I sat in the corner and watched everyone and felt like I was watching it through glass." "Yes," I said immediately. "That's exactly what it is. Glass." He turned to look at me. Something shifted in his expression. That slight recalibration I'd seen before, like a piece of information arriving and being filed. "Do you still feel like that?" he said. I looked at the rail yard, the October light on the rusted freight cars, the Manhattan skyline visible in the far distance, hazy and certain. "Sometimes," I said. "Less lately." He didn't ask why. He just nodded once and went back to his sandwich. I knew why. I wasn't ready to say it yet. "Stay with me," because the night everything shifted, it came from the direction I least expected. 6 weeks after the joint training, on a Tuesday at 11:47 p.m., my unit got dispatched to a partial track collapse on the F-line between Carroll Street and Smith 9 Terror, a section of elevated structure over the Gowanus Canal where decades of deferred maintenance had finally made their argument. No train involved, no passengers in the affected section, but the structural assessment team needed a confined space escort to reach the underside of the collapse zone, and that was my unit's call. I went in. With my partner, Drea Vasquez, 2 structural engineers, and a comms line back to Incident Command. What I want to tell you about the Carroll Street job is not the technical part, the shoring we placed, the path we cut through the debris, the 4 hours we spent in a space that smelled like a century of rain and rust, and the specific mineral cold of the Gowanus at night. I want to tell you about the 40 minutes at hour 3 when Drea's radio dropped signal and the structural team's lead engineer had a vasovagal response in the confined space, and I was running 2 jobs simultaneously, keeping the engineer conscious and oriented while monitoring the debris field for secondary movement. And I was doing both things correctly and completely, and I felt, for the first time in 18 months of this work, the thing that I now understand was not strength. It was a wall. There was a wall in my chest, and I was putting things behind it so I could keep working, and the wall was holding, and I was grateful the wall was holding. And somewhere underneath the gratitude was the awareness that walls don't hold forever, and I didn't know what was behind this one. We extracted at 4:15 a.m. The engineer was fine. The structure was shored. Drea got her radio signal back at the egress point. I came out onto the Gowanus sidewalk and stood in the dark for a moment, and my phone buzzed. On standby at Carroll St. They didn't need EMS tonight, but I heard the dispatch. You okay? I stood in the dark with my phone in my hand. He had heard the dispatch, and he had come, and he was standing somewhere nearby in the dark, and he was asking, "Where are you?" I typed, "Half a block north, canal side." I walked north. He was leaning against the EMS truck, jacket on, hands in his pockets, watching the canal. The Gowanus at 4:20 a.m. is not beautiful. It is dark and industrial and smells of things the city has tried to forget. But the lights from the Carroll Street Bridge were reflecting on the water, and Fenn was standing in that light, and he turned when he heard me, and his face was open. That's the word, just open. "Hey," he said. "You didn't need to come," I said. "I know," he said. I stood there for a moment. The canal moved. A train passed somewhere, the distant rhythmic sound of it, the city continuing its shift work without us. "There's a wall," I said. I hadn't planned to say it. He looked at me. He didn't say what. He didn't say, "What do you mean?" He just waited with that full, unhurried attention. "When it gets bad in there," I said, "I put things behind a wall so I can keep working, and it works. It always works. But tonight I was aware of the wall in a way I stopped. I don't usually feel the wall. I just use it." Fenn was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's on the other side?" I looked at the canal. The reflected lights moved. "I don't know," I said. "I've never looked." He was very still. "Cassian," he said. "Yeah." "The wall isn't a problem," he said. "It's how you do the job. The problem would be if it was the only thing." He paused. "Is it the only thing?" I turned to look at him. He was 3 feet away. The bridge light was on his face, warm, direct, the amber of a New York night that never goes fully dark. He had been awake since whatever hour his shift started, and he had heard a dispatch and come to stand on a canal bank at 4 a.m. for no reason that his job required. "No," I said. "It's not the only thing." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly. Something quieter than a smile. "Good," he said. "I need you to understand something about what happened next, because it's the smallest thing, and it's the thing I keep going back to." He didn't say anything for a long moment. We stood on the canal bank with the bridge light between us and the city running its overnight machinery around us. And then he took one step. Just one step. So that we were standing close enough that I could feel the warmth off his jacket. He didn't touch me. He just closed the distance to the point where not touching was a choice. "Are you okay?" he said, quietly. "I keep being," I said. He looked at me. I felt like something was being read in my face very carefully. Not clinically. Personally. "Me too," he said. We stood there for a while. The canal reflected the lights. Somewhere beneath us, in the dark, the tunnels ran. The Hudson River Greenway at sunset is one of the specific, unreasonable gifts that New York gives you to make up for everything else it takes. Late October, when the light comes off the water at the angle that makes the New Jersey Palisades look like a painting, and the whole Manhattan skyline is gold and rust, and you can stand on the path by Pier 45 and feel, for a moment, like the city is showing you something it doesn't usually show. I had been here before, but I had never brought anyone here. I'm not sure I knew how, before. Fenn was beside me, a coffee in each hand. He'd insisted on the coffee, had appeared with it from a cart on the corner of Christopher Street with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who expresses care as logistics, and we were watching the sun go down over the Hudson. He had a day off. I was between shifts. We had arrived here without particularly deciding to, the way you arrive places in New York. Subway, then walking, then suddenly here, facing west. The light was doing what that light does. It was hitting him directly. His face was turned toward the water, and the sun was on his jaw, his temples, the place where his collar turned back, all that warmth, all that direct, clear autumn light. And I thought, this is the opposite of the tunnel. The tunnel has no light that isn't artificial. The tunnel is never warm. The tunnel is a place where you read everything by the quality of the dark and the sound of what you can't see, and here is all light and warmth, and his face in the middle of it, unhidden. "What are you thinking about?" he said, without turning. "Contrast," I said. He turned then. He was close. We'd been standing close since the canal bank, had been closing the remaining distance in increments so slow and deliberate that neither of us could have said when it started. His face was level with mine. The sun was behind him now, and the edge light on his features made everything in his expression visible. The attentiveness, the warmth, the thing underneath both of those that I had been trying to name since J Street Metrotech on a Thursday morning in October. "I want to tell you something," he said. "All right," I said. "I requested the Carroll Street standby," he said. It wasn't a random assignment. I saw the dispatch come in and I requested it. He held my gaze. "I wanted to be there when you came out." I looked at him. The light was going now, the sun at the edge of the Palisades, the Hudson turning from gold to steel. "Fenn," I said. "Yeah." "I've been telling you things I don't tell people," I said, "about the wall, about the glass, about what it feels like after the tunnel." I paused. "I've been telling you because you're the only person I've met who I think—" I stopped. "Who you think what?" he said quietly. "Who I think could hold them," I said, without making them smaller. He was very still. The wind came off the river, cold and clean, the specific smell of the Hudson in October, water and stone and distance. And then, slowly, with full knowledge of exactly what he was doing, he reached up and put his hand against the side of my face. Warm, sure. Not pulling me anywhere, just his hand on my face, in the light, with the city behind him and the river behind me. I put my hand over his. Neither of us moved. The sun finished going down. The city lights came up. The skyline went from gold to amber to the specific illuminated blue of a New York night. All those windows, all those lives running in parallel, the whole enormous churning thing, and two people standing still in the middle of it. Here is what a stranger, walking their dog along the Pier 45 section of the Hudson River Greenway, would have seen at 6. 11 p.m. on the 28th of October. Two young men facing each other at the railing overlooking the river. One taller, in a dark work jacket, his hand raised to cover the other's hand on his face. Both of them very still, the way people are still when something is happening that they don't want to rush. The light going gold and then gone behind the Jersey Palisades. The river doing what rivers do. The dog stopped walking and sat down and watched them for a moment. The stranger let it. Then the light changed, and the city came on, and the two men were still there. Still there? Still.